Napoleon, that synthesis of monster and Übermensch. The name of Napoleon Bonaparte comes up in almost every major work of Nietzsche, which should not be surprising, because during Nietzsche's time, Napoleon had been dead for less than 100 years, and the memory of the emperor still held sway over the imagination of writers, artists, and philosophers. One question in particular loomed over the European consciousness. What was Napoleon's role in history? In other words, how should we interpret the phenomenon of Napoleon Bonaparte? The first sustained treatment of Napoleon in Nietzsche's works appears in Beyond Good and Evil. It's a paragraph in which he discusses the dichotomy between those who obey and those who command, and the relationship between the two. The paragraph prefigures many ideas that will become more prominent as Nietzsche develops his philosophy further, most notably the theme of the strong versus the weak, and slave morality versus master morality. It's quite a difficult paragraph, so let's take it step by step. First, Nietzsche makes the argument that for all of mankind's history, there have been those who obey and those who command. And those who command are always small in number compared to those who obey. In all ages, as long as mankind has existed, there have also been human herds, family alliances, communities, tribes, peoples, states, churches, and always a great number who obey in proportion to the small number who command. Secondly, he argues that because of this, there is an innate need in mankind to obey. One may reasonably suppose that, generally speaking, the need thereof is now innate in everyone, as a kind of formal conscience which gives the command, "Thou shalt." This instinct will try to find something to obey, anything, any source of authority, whether that be God, the law, public opinion, parents, teachers, or whatever. However, as societies degenerate and this instinct to obey proliferates, Nietzsche warns that the ability to command will become so rare as to cease to exist entirely, leaving only the great herds of obeying humanity without anything or anyone to give them direction, like a flock of sheep without a shepherd. Now, here comes the kicker. This process, we call it democratization, is already the state of affairs in Europe. This condition of things actually exists in Europe at present. I call it the moral hypocrisy of the commanding class. They know no other way of protecting themselves from their bad conscience than by playing the role of executors of older and higher orders, of predecessors of the Constitution, of justice, of the law, or of God himself. Or they even justify themselves by maxims from the current opinions of the herd as first servants of their people, or instruments of the public weal. This puts the natural order on its head. The leaders justify themselves by virtue of the followers, when, on the contrary, they should rule like sovereigns, beholden to no one. Instead, they take the morality of the herd as their guiding principle, and they see themselves as protectors of it. It's like they've become sick. The leaders should proudly affirm their own morality and delight in their own ability to command, instead of looking towards the weak for justification of their desires. In later works, Nietzsche will give this disease the formal name of degeneracy. But just as this process of democratization reaches a boiling point, something interesting happens. What appears among the ruins of Europe? A breath of fresh air. Napoleon appears. In spite of all, what a blessing, what a deliverance from a weight becoming unendurable is the appearance of an absolute ruler for these gregarious Europeans. Of this fact, the effect of the appearance of Napoleon was the last great proof. This is the context in which we need to see Nietzsche's view on Napoleon, as a phenomenon, as a countercurrent against the descending culture of Europe, someone who is able to command, a shepherd in a world of sheep, someone who is increasingly rare, a type of man thought to have gone extinct. When Nietzsche says elsewhere that Napoleon is an anachronism, this is what he means. Napoleon is simply a type of man that was considered to be impossible in his time. Is it any wonder that Napoleon is mentioned along the likes of Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar, men who lived thousands of years before him? And indeed, this ancient quality of Napoleon is one of his most striking features, and it plays a prominent role in Nietzsche's analysis. Napoleon's singular focus on power, his limitless ambition, his desire to rule and command, was seen by Nietzsche as an ancient characteristic, the ultimate devotion to a single cause, something you dedicate your entire life to. This is a motif that recurs throughout his writings, but interestingly, in Daybreak, he applies it to Napoleon. Napoleon, as the complete and fully developed type of a single instinct, belongs to ancient humanity, whose characteristic, the simple construction and ingenious development and realization of a single motive or a small number of motives, may be easily enough recognized. Why exactly this would be an ancient Greek or Roman characteristic, we may deduce from another passage in Daybreak where Nietzsche discusses the golden age of Athens. Note how he links every name with a single occupation. This culture, which has its poet in Sophocles, its statesman in Pericles, its doctor in Hippocrates, and its natural philosopher in Democritus. Just as Hippocrates devoted his life to medicine, so did Napoleon devote his life to conquest, power, and the desire to rule. Since we are talking about Daybreak, an early work of Nietzsche, he has not yet formulated his concept of the will to power, which states that all what drives men, and indeed all that exists, is a desire for power. Even Hippocrates, in his own way, sought to overcome himself and attain mastery over nature through medicine. But the fact that throughout his intellectual career, Nietzsche held Napoleon in high esteem is a sort of foreshadowing of his later philosophy in which the word power takes center stage. Compare the following excerpt from the unpublished work The Will to Power, Nietzsche's final written words. Napoleon, highest activity and health are the signs of a great man. The straight line and grand style rediscovered in action, the mightiest of all instincts, that of life itself, the lust of dominion, heartily welcomed. But above all, the Greek ancient character of Napoleon reveals itself in yet another aspect of his personality, or rather his significance in world history. Napoleon, as perhaps no other man in modern history, embodied the ideal of nobility, previously only found in the Greco-Roman world to such a refined degree. What do we mean by this? What is nobility? In chemistry, a noble gas is a gas that doesn't react with other chemicals. It's as if their atoms are too good to mingle with the lesser other elements. In the animal kingdom, the eagle is considered one of the most noble animals, and they fly alone. Nobility also implies hierarchy, and the noble stands on top. The lion, another noble creature par excellence, is the apex predator of his environment, the king of the jungle. And in humans, in the European Ancien Régime in particular, the nobility comprised of the lawmaking and governing elites, divided from the commoners. Comprising only a tiny percentage of the total population, they enjoyed wealth, grandeur, power, and remained atop of the power structure of European society for centuries, until at last the French Revolution overthrew the old regime and paved the way for the modern world. To use a Nietzschean phrase, what characterizes the noble, and Nietzsche sometimes speaks of higher men in this regard, is what he called a certain pathos of distance. The pathos of distance is a term that tries to capture the prevailing attitude of the higher man, of the noble man. In a single term, it grows out of the constant outlooking and downlooking of the ruling castes on subordinates and instruments, and out of their equally constant practice of obeying and commanding, of keeping down and keeping at a distance. The aristocratic disdain towards the common class is what defines the pathos of distance. It's the process by which the aristocrats create distance, in a moral sense, between themselves and others. Every higher man of a more complete type must have this attitude within himself. He must have a deep-rooted sense of superiority over others in order to be able to command, wield power, attain mastery over himself and others, and to create good art. Alexander the Great believed he was the son of Zeus, a demigod roaming the earth, whom the gods had blessed with martial prowess such as the world had never seen before. Roman emperors considered themselves gods walking the earth and demanded to be venerated as such. Kings in the Middle Ages ruled by the divine right of kings, in the belief that God had personally blessed the king with the power to rule, and that he was therefore justified to rule and command. It's clear how these associations with the divine create a distance between king and subject. But nobility of character can also manifest in other dimensions than the political. Nietzsche considered Schopenhauer to be of noble character because of his radical honesty, his will to go beyond the accepted beliefs of the day, to pursue the truth above all else, because of his willingness to stand alone. A really self-dependent intellect like Schopenhauer, a man and knight with a glance of bronze, who has the courage to be himself, who knows how to stand alone without first waiting for men who cover him in front and the nods of his superiors. And Nietzsche also names Goethe in the same breath as Napoleon. He calls him a conqueror, even though obviously Goethe's dominion was not political, he had no empire. But he still enjoyed a kind of domination of German and European culture. So the pathos of distance, the noble character, need not necessarily express itself in the political sphere. But in the case of Napoleon, it did. And just as Alexander believed in his divine ancestry, Napoleon believed in his star of destiny that would carry him to greatness. After the Battle of Lodi, an early victory of General Bonaparte, he famously remarked the following: "I foresaw what I might be. Already I felt the earth flee from beneath me, as if I were being carried into the sky." Napoleon literally saw himself being raised up into the sky, looking down from a great height upon the world that he desired to rule. This pathos of distance translates into a disregard for mere life. And this aspect of Napoleon's character is well documented and provides much of the source material for his critics, among them most famously Tolstoy in War and Peace. Napoleon has been criticized for endlessly throwing men into the meat grinder, to move his army divisions like pieces on a chessboard, sacrificing them without a second thought, without hesitation, without pity. Such a disregard for life, harsh as it may sound to modern ears, is one of the characteristics of the noble. These higher men simply do not concern themselves with the lot of the commoners. Many of Napoleon's most famous quotes highlight precisely this aspect of his personality. For example, when he met the famous Austrian diplomat Metternich for peace talks, he remarked, "I have grown up on battlefields, and a man like me cares little about the lives of 1,000,000 men." Napoleon's greatness lies precisely in his cynical willingness to sacrifice men in the millions to satisfy his own will to power. Not since antiquity, Nietzsche argued, had the world seen such an honest display of aristocratic disdain for mere life. In Twilight of the Idols, Nietzsche expounds upon his idea of greatness. The question that he asks is the following: where do great men come from? In short, an explosion of force. Great men, like great ages, are explosive material in which a stupendous amount of power is accumulated. The first conditions of their existence are always historical and physiological. They are the outcome of the fact that for long ages energy has been collected, hoarded up, saved up and preserved for their use, and that no explosion has taken place. When the tension in the bulk has become sufficiently excessive, the most fortuitous stimulus suffices in order to call genius, great deeds, and momentous fate into the world. For Nietzsche, greatness is a process of a gradual building up of energy which is finally expended at a critical moment and bursts forth into the world. As such, the genius or the great man appears as a product of external circumstances, as an individual in which a great quantity of power must finally be unleashed, a tension which resolves itself at a critical moment, spurred on by some kind of stimulus. In other words, men like Napoleon are a long time in the making. Great men are necessary. The age in which they appear is a matter of chance. The fact that they almost invariably master their age is accounted for simply by the fact that they are stronger, that they are older, and that power has been stored for longer in them. Nietzsche makes the touching point that if you look at history and consider the French Revolution, you would expect that age not to produce a Napoleon, but to produce the opposite type. The age of equality, as immortalized in the revolutionary slogan of Égalité, Fraternité, and Liberté, produced a man who was no one's equal. The country that beheaded a king produced an emperor. Again, Napoleon is an anachronism, someone who was not of his time. And it's precisely this anti-temporal dimension, as it were, this being outside of time, rising above the spirit of the times, not walking in conformity with it, willingness to stand alone and bend the world and times to your will, that constitute greatness. The revolution made Napoleon possible, that is its justification. We ought to desire the anarchical collapse of our whole civilization if such a reward were to be its result. In conclusion, Napoleon is the ancient spirit reborn in modern times, aristocracy amidst democracy, a great distance between the great and the base, the noble bravery to stand alone with no equals. In the words of Hegel, which he wrote down when he saw Napoleon in the flesh, I saw the emperor, this soul of the world, go out from the city to survey his reign. It is truly a wonderful sensation to see such an individual who, concentrated on one point while seated on a horse, stretches over the world and dominates it. We will discuss how the phenomenon of Napoleon fits into Hegel's philosophy in a follow-up video, to be released shortly. Subscribe if you don't want to miss it. For now, I want to leave you with some words which are, in my opinion, Nietzsche's most beautiful writings on Napoleon. Written in the Genealogy of Morals, I will quote at length. But first, thank you for watching, and if you like our work and want to support us, please join our Patreon where you'll find access to a dozen exclusive videos that are not on YouTube. With that said, I leave you with Nietzsche's Genealogy of Morals. Slave morality proved yet once more victorious over the classical ideal in the French Revolution, and in a sense, which was even more crucial and even more profound, the last political aristocracy that existed in Europe, that of the French 17th and 18th centuries, broke into pieces beneath the instincts of a resentful populace. Never had the world heard a greater jubilation, a more uproarious enthusiasm. Indeed, there took place in the midst of it the most monstrous and unexpected phenomenon. The ancient ideal itself swept before the eyes and conscience of humanity with all its life and with unheard splendor, and in opposition to resentment's lying war cry of the prerogative of the most, in opposition to the will to lowliness, abasement and equalization, the will to a retrogression and twilight of humanity, there rang out once again, stronger, simpler, more penetrating than ever, the terrible and enchanting counter-war cry of the prerogative of the few. Like a final signpost to other ways, there appeared Napoleon, the most unique and violent anachronism that ever existed, and in him the incarnate problem of the aristocratic ideal in itself. Consider well what a problem it is. Napoleon, that synthesis of monster and Superman.